I've hid my period from everyone, including my mother, for nearly 3 years. So, this is a story that has been on my chest for many years now, and I feel like I have to tell this story to somebody, even if it's a bunch of internet strangers. This is something that I feel shame over, but I desperately need to get it off my chest. Warning, this is going to be a long read. So, I am 19 years old now, but my period started when I was 13. The first time I even learned what periods are was when I was 11. At that time, I had a pretty good relationship with my mother, and would openly talk about my concerns. Obviously, as a young kid who's never menstruated before, I had no clue truly what to expect or what it'll be like. I have always asked people like my mom or my doctor how you know when it has started. They've always just replied with, "You just know." Because of that, I felt paranoid, and looked for any kind of clue that it might be starting. One day when I was 12, I went to the bathroom, and started to panic when I noticed a very small red dot on the toilet paper. It was as small as could be, but since I didn't know really what to look out for, I was convinced that this was my period. It wasn't, but I really thought it was. Now, like I mentioned, I had a pretty good relationship with my mother at the time, so I told her almost right away. I felt embarrassed and awkward about it, but the important thing is that I still told her. But, that day, and the day that followed sort of marked the beginning of my distrust in my mother. After we talked for a while, she told me to go put a pad on. I felt embarrassed to wear one, since I sort of associated them with diapers or something. I told my mom to not tell my dad or brother, and she promised to keep it between us. Later that night, I could absolutely tell that my mother told my dad. He didn't directly say anything, but I could tell with how awkward he was acting. Looking back on this, I sort of understand. I mean, your daughter getting her period could be seen as a big deal, so it's only natural that my mother would tell my dad. But, the next day is when it got really bad. Since this was not my period, of course no blood was coming out, but my mother just assumed that it was going to be really light for my first one. Throughout the entire day, my mom would keep making these comments. She would jokingly call the pad I was wearing a diaper. She'd say things like, "Ah, it's like you're a baby wearing a diaper again." Maybe she meant well when she said that, but I was feeling embarrassed enough. When I got a bit upset and told her to stop, she said, "Oh boy, you're all pissy now since you're on your period." I hated that day, since I felt so humiliated and embarrassed. By the second half of the day, I sort of concluded that my period has in fact not started yet, and this was just a false alarm. But still, the damage was done for me. When I told my mom it was a false alarm, she said, "Oh, guess I have to delete my Facebook post now." I felt alarmed when she said that, and asked what she meant. She said that she posted on her Facebook about me starting my period. I started to freak out, since my mother was friends with a few of my teachers from school, and various strangers I don't know. She said it wasn't a big deal, since all girls go through it, and it's a beautiful thing. As time passed since that day, I have started to distrust my mother. Of course, there were many other factors other than the false period incident, but I won't get into all that here. I was out of the woods for now, but I knew that it was only a matter of time before I got my cycle for real. Finally, on one fateful day during summer break, I went to use the bathroom, and found quite a lot of spotting on my underwear. I began to panic, since there was no doubt what this was. This wasn't just a simple barely visible dot, this was large splotches of blood. I was scared, freaking out, and crying quite a bit. I spent the rest of that day watching YouTube videos all about periods and how to handle them. I grabbed the 12-pack of pads left over from the false alarm over a year prior, and wore one. Hours passed, and I knew I had to tell my mother. But, I remembered how it went last time, so I hesitated. I kept on hesitating and hesitating. I never ended up telling her. I couldn't bring myself to. I didn't want that feeling of shame again, especially since at that point, we had a much worse relationship with each other. So, I kept it a secret. Now, everyone's first period is different, but mine was extremely tame at the start. It really wasn't all too much, and because of that, I naively assumed that every single period of mine was going to be this way. As the day went on, hardly any blood was coming out. And, while I know this is gross, I thought that I only had to use one pad per period. So that way, I could use the 12-pack of pads I had, and it would last me a full year. Obviously, I eventually found out how that wouldn't work. But, I had to find some solution. I was 13, so I obviously didn't know how to drive, and I wasn't allowed to go for walks by myself, so it's not like I could go to any stores and purchase products I needed. I debated asking my school nurse for products, but I didn't want the risk of her telling my mother. Eventually, I settled on toilet paper. I have to say that you should never use toilet paper as a replacement for proper period products, unless of course for an absolute emergency. It is incredibly uncomfortable, has higher change to produce an odor, and is generally unsafe, since it could lead to infection. But, I felt like I had no choice. So, I would make a large stack of toilet paper to use as a makeshift pad. It was unbearable sometimes, especially when I was at school, and would have to sit on those hard plastic chairs. When one was used, I would wrap it up and put it in my trash. After my period was over, I would throw all the trash away in the large bin outside when nobody was looking. That was my life for many years. I feel gross and ashamed to even be talking about this right now. Of course, at the age of 13, I was pretty naive when it came to my cycle. It took me a while to get used to it, and adapt when my flow would get slightly heavier. It may come as a shock to some people when I say this, but I have never once stained anything besides underwear. I'd say that my period is at around a medium to light flow, with it being a bit more light a few years ago. I was always careful about staining things with blood. I'd make an extra large toilet paper pad for when I would sleep. The moment I woke up, I quickly got up and made a dash to the bathroom. So, I've never had to deal with my clothing or bedsheets getting stains on them. I'm sure that nobody out there enjoys going through a period, but it has always been especially tiring for me. I hated the process of making all those toilet paper pads, going through that discomfort, and having to keep everything a secret. I can understand if people read this and believe that I was being very overdramatic. It's really difficult to explain my thoughts and feelings during those years. Part of me was doing this because I didn't want to go through that shame again. Part of me was doing this to prove to my mom that I can handle myself, and part of me felt like I was in too deep to back out now. And yes, keep in mind that I was a young teen. 13 to 14-year-olds are not exactly known for being the wisest. Another thing I'd have to do is lie whenever I'd see a doctor. Of course, when you see the doctor, they're gonna ask you when your last period was. My mom always insisted in staying in the room with me whenever I'd see a doctor, so I'd have to lie. I felt so guilty lying to a doctor, but it's what I felt like I needed to do. Though, there was a time I almost got caught. When I was maybe 14, I was being tested for scoliosis, and had to get an X-ray. When the doctor was looking at my X-ray, he asked me when my period started, to which I answered that it hasn't yet. The doctor looked confused and said that it should have started around at least a year ago. My mom thought it was strange, but didn't put two and two together. As the years went by, and I kept my secret, I knew that the day was going to come where I would have to come clean. I mean, it would be concerning if my period just never showed up. It was just a few days away from my 16th birthday, and I felt a lot of stress, since I was told that I had to see the doctor in order to get a refill on some of my medication. That's all normal, but my mom mentioned that she wanted to talk to the doctor about my absent period. I started to freak out, since she mentioned doing certain medical procedures and things like blood tests. I didn't want them to do any unnecessary procedures or give me unnecessary medications. I knew that it was time to tell her, but I was terrified. I've been hiding this for almost 3 years. I've never told anybody, not even my friends. It was going to be very hard for me to come clean about it. The night before the appointment, I actually made a post here on Reddit explaining this exact story. It was on a different account that I've since deleted. I was asking for advice on what I should do, and I've got a variety of responses. One common thing that people said was that my mom likely already knew, and was just waiting for me to fess up. I can promise you that my mother had no idea. She was convinced the entire time that it just hasn't started yet. Even if she did know, she definitely wouldn't have just stayed quiet about it. The next day came, and I got in the car, ready for my mom to drive me to school. I knew I had to do it right then. It was the most difficult thing for me to bring up. I started off by saying I was nervous for the appointment. I eventually worked up to saying that I have a secret, but if I told her, she would hate me. She naturally got very concerned, and questioned if my period just started for the first time like a few days ago. Now, I know that I could have lied and said that my period just started a few days ago, but I didn't want to. I wanted her to know that I've been doing this on my own for almost 3 years, and that I didn't need her help. I simply told her no, for 3 years. At that moment, she instantly brought the car to a stop on the side of a neighborhood road. She was obviously very shocked. Never in my life has my mom laid her hands on me, but I saw in that moment as she raised her hand up, like she was going to smack me. She never brought down her hand on me, but I have never seen her so enraged. There was lots of screaming, and lots of tears. I don't want to write down the details, since it's a difficult memory for me to revisit. In a way, I understood where she was coming from. She just found out that her daughter kept a secret this big for 3 years, and she was likely very worried about why I haven't gotten my period yet. Once she sort of calmed down, she asked me why I would do this. I told her the truth. I said that I didn't trust her, and that I could handle myself. That made her start screaming again. I was late to school at this point, but that was the least of my concerns. Eventually, she drove the rest of the way to school. She told me that today, she was going to get me period products. When she mentioned getting pads, I instantly shot that down. In my mind, I knew that if she got me pads, I'd need to repeatedly ask her to buy me more once I've ran out, which is not something I felt willing to do. I told her that I would rather have period underwear, since that's something I could wash on my own. Surprisingly, she agreed. It was awkward going to school that day, since my eyes were all red and puffy from crying. After school, I still had to go to the doctor's appointment, but the topic of periods never came up. While that day was very rough for me, it sort of felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't a secret anymore. I thought that maybe after I get past this awkward phase, things will be easier, since I'll finally have proper products. But, I couldn't be more wrong. I got the period underwear, specifically 2 pairs of them. That's obviously not enough to last a full 6 to 7 days. I begged my mom to allow me to be the one to wash them, but she refused. She said that she was going to be the one to take them and wash them, which felt humiliating to me. I didn't want her to see any blood that came from my period. So, I just went back to using toilet paper. I would still wear the period underwear when I felt my period was about to start, or it's almost ended. This led to an argument where my mom would question me on why there are no new blood stains on the underwear, and me responding why she's even inspecting them in the first place. I felt like I was back to square one. The only difference now is that I had to deal with my mother asking me once a month for the underwear, so she could wash it. She would ask for it in a very loud voice, loud enough to where my dad and brother could easily hear. I seriously couldn't stand the toilet paper pads anymore. I felt so ashamed to still be doing it, especially when I was a senior in high school. When I was 18, I made the best decision of my life regarding my period, and got a menstrual cup. It took months upon months to even learn how to get it inside, since I've never even used a tampon before, and even more time to get the hang of it. But, it has been such a nice relief. Nowadays, that's what I always use. I don't have to deal with the feeling of blood coming out of me anymore, and most of all, I didn't have to deal with the discomfort. Getting it was difficult. I was not allowed to be anywhere on my own except for the mall, since my mom was worried about my safety. But, I snuck out of the mall one day and headed to Target, where I got the cup. The struggle after that was figuring out how to sterilize it, since it often needs to be boiled before using it the first time. It took many months before I was home alone for just long enough for me to do it. After that, and of course the whole learning curve, that cup is now my best friend, and I haven't made one of those damn toilet paper pads since. Life is much better for me right now, and I can handle things on my own. I moved out of my parents' house a few months ago, and currently live in Japan, so I don't have to deal with my mother anymore. This whole story was incredibly long, and if you've read this far, thank you. I know that this story sounds ridiculous and immature. I wish so much that periods weren't this thing to be embarrassed and ashamed over. Nobody should feel that way, but I unfortunately did, all because of a mother that made me feel like I needed to be shamed. As long as this story was, I couldn't fit every single detail inside, but just keep in mind that there were many other factors that lead to my distrust in my mother. This story may not sound like some huge deal, but it was for me. To answer some questions that you may have, no, I am not religious, nor is my family religious. Both me and my mother are atheists, so that didn't contribute to this. No, I didn't tell anybody about this while it was still a secret. I was and still am very close to my father, but I wouldn't be comfortable with telling him about such a thing. And yes, I understand that I may have been acting very immature and overdramatic in the past. Trust me, I do not feel proud about this. But, it's all in the past now. As ashamed as I feel about this part of my life, if I had the opportunity to go back in time and just tell my mother my period started the day it actually started, I don't know if I would take it. Life got arguably harder after she knew, and not just because she felt betrayed by me. I feel jealous of people who are close with their mothers, and have no issue talking about things like puberty and menstruation. I didn't have that, and it felt scary and intimidating to go through it alone. I am very happy that I am doing much better now, and sincerely thank you all for taking time out of your day to read this. I have been holding this entire story inside for half a decade, and it felt good to write it all out.